Lesson 4, the key to successful macro recording. Well, here's the awful truth. The macro recorder, most of the time, does not work. But by watching this lesson, I'll show you the one setting that you can change so that way your macros will work 95% of the time instead of 5% of the time. Let's get started. Well, in this lesson, I have a list of names and addresses. Now, this is a real story. The lady from the local Chamber of Commerce had called me up one day and she said, "Hey Bill, I want to do a mail merge. I have data in Excel and I want to create labels in Word. Can you show me how to do that?" And it was a day where I was fairly busy. I didn't have time to go and try and teach this lady how to do a mail merge. And frankly, the whole mail merge process is fairly mystifying. 6 steps, and you have to stand on your head for a few of those steps. I said, why don't you just send me the file and I'll take care of it for you and send you the labels back. And she said, "Oh, that would be great." So now I had made a huge assumption. When this lady said Excel mail merge, I had assumed that she had some clue about how to set data up in Excel to do a mail merge. And the workbook opens up and I have 175 names and addresses in completely the wrong format. If you think about it, the mail merge needs to have name in column A, address in column B, city, state, zip in column C, and I'm thinking to myself, oh no, I'm going to have to do 175 copy and paste transpose in order to solve this problem. And I said, well, wait, wouldn't it be cool if I could write a macro that would solve this problem? And I could write a macro to fix just the first record and then run the macro again and again and again. So let's try this. Let's say that you want to record a macro. So we choose record macro and I'm going to call it fix one record. Shortcut key. Well, I'm going to reuse Control A. I know that Control A already does something, but Control A is kind of one of my favorite macros because it's easy to hit. And frankly, this is a one-time use macro. I'm going to use it to solve this problem and then it's going to go away. So because of that, where do I want to store the macro? Well, I don't want to store it in the personal macro workbook. This is a one-time situation. It's not something I want to keep around. And I probably don't want to store it in this workbook because then the macro will be in the file that I send back to the lady. So I'm going to store it, in this case, in a new workbook. All right, I'm about to click OK, so I want to plan out my steps here. I'm starting on the first name. I want to go down and grab that address. I'm going to cut that cell, go up and paste it to B1, and then go down to A3, cut that cell, and paste it to C1. All right, so I know what I'm going to do. Probably after that, I'll delete rows 2, 3, and 4, and make sure that I'm on the name for the next address. That way I can just run the macro again. So we click OK. I see that the macro recorder is running and I go through and do my steps. I go down to cell A2, I cut, and I paste to B1 with Control V. And then I go down to cell A3, I cut with Control X, use the arrow keys to go up to C1 and paste to C1. Now I need to delete rows 2, 3, and 4. Delete the entire row. And finally, I want to make sure that I'm on that first name. So I press the up arrow key and the down arrow key, and I think I'm ready to roll. I've solved this problem. I've fixed the first record. All I have to do now is press Control A again and again and again, and I'm ready to go. Well, before we can run the macro, of course, we have to stop recording the macro. So we'll click the Stop Recording button down here, and you would think we are ready to go. Here's the sad, sad truth. That macro that we recorded, very simple. I mean, basically, what was it? It was a cut, a paste, a cut, a paste, delete 3 rows, select 1 cell, 6 steps. It was just about as easy as the macro that we recorded in lesson 2. Unfortunately, one very unfortunate default setting that Microsoft sets up makes that macro not work. When we run the macro, here's what the macro recorder is going to do. The macro recorder is so literal, it saw me go to cell A2. So when I run this macro, it's going to go to cell A2 and it's going to cut that cell. And then it's going to paste it to B1 just like I did. Then it's going to go down to A3 and cut that cell and paste it to C1 just like I did. And then it's going to delete rows 2, 3, and 4 and select cell A2. Well, that's a very bad thing. because we're going to be destroying data. I mean, frankly, the macro is only good for fixing the first record. And by the time we've recorded the macro, the first record is actually fixed. Here, let me run the macro. You won't actually see it because it'll happen so fast. But you can see that we are basically destroying data. If I would hold down Control A, I could destroy this entire data set very, very, very quickly. While that's fun to watch, it's definitely not useful. How can it be that Microsoft has a macro recorder that can't handle this simple step? Well, that's a great question. I'm going to close this file without saving. File close. Save changes no. And then we'll reopen that file. It turns out that there is a way to record this macro. Actually, one thing you could do is go back to Lotus 123, any version from 1985 on, when Lotus could record a macro that would solve this problem. The Lotus macro recorder, although it was very limited, was able to record this particular set of steps. It turns out that the setting that we need is something called Use Relative Reference. Use Relative Reference. If we hover above Relative Reference, they now provide a fairly nice tooltip here, 3 paragraphs that tell us what's going on. If you're in Excel 2003, the Use Relative Reference button is on the right side of the Stop Recording toolbar with the only tooltip saying Relative Reference. Not a good explanation at all. Basically, relative reference is something that we want to use most of the time because it doesn't record that we're going to go to cell A2. It's going to record that we're going to go down 1 cell from wherever we started. So I'll say Use Relative Reference, and now I'll start recording the macro. Again, I'll call it Fix 1. For the shortcut key, we can't use Control A because that has already been assigned to the workbook that we previously recorded in this lesson. So I'll just use something else. Control S should be easy to hit. And again, we're going to store that in a new workbook. Now you'll notice there's no way to store it in the same workbook that we used in the last example. We're just going to be creating new workbooks here. And that's okay because when we're done, we're going to delete all of those workbooks. We're going to close them without saving, and the macro will just simply go away. Click OK. All right, now we want to make sure that relative reference is on, so I'm just going to go up and do a visual check here. Use relative reference is highlighted, so we're good to go. I'm going to repeat the exact same steps. Notice that you can do this with either the arrow keys or the mouse. It doesn't matter. Either method's going to work. So let's try it with the mouse. We'll go down to A2. I'll cut, and then go up to B1 and paste. I'll try it with the arrow keys. Use the left arrow key, the down arrow key twice. Control X to cut, up 2, right 2, and paste. I'll delete the next 3 rows, and then choose 1 cell, so up arrow key, down arrow key, to make sure I'm on the next name. All right, so now let's press stop, and we'll test this macro. Control S, and we see that that information worked perfectly. Try the next one, worked perfectly. Once we see that it's working, we can just simply hold down Control S and fix all 175 of these records very, very quickly. Certainly much faster than it would have taken for me to go through and fix the records one at a time using paste transpose. So in this lesson, we talked about use relative reference. Most of the time, the macros that I'm recording, I'm going to leave relative reference on all of the time. You'll occasionally find some examples where you need to turn relative reference off for a few steps. Like for example, if we always needed to go back to cell A1 and you don't know how many rows you have, well then you might turn relative reference off for those few steps and then turn it back on for the rest of the macro. It's unfortunate that Microsoft didn't turn this on by default. People would have much better experience recording their first macros and having them work most of the time if relative reference was just simply turned on. You need to pay attention to relative reference. It remembers the settings from before. So if I don't close Excel and I go on to lesson 5, it's going to remember that relative reference is on. So it's not a matter of that you always have to click it. You have to go back. You have to see whether it's on or whether it's off and make sure that it's in the appropriate state for your particular situation. Well, I hope you found this lesson useful. In the next lesson, we'll learn about dealing with a variable number of rows.
Looking to advance your career by acquiring new skills? Tired of expensive off-site training programs? Wish you could learn from the best instructors in the industry? Look no further than live lessons. Self-paced, personal video instruction by the world's leading technology publishers. Each live lesson comes with a DVD featuring 3 to 4 hours of instructor-led classroom training, sample program code that allows you to work along with your personal instructor, and an example-rich study guide. Live lessons allow you to watch the entire course from start to finish, or navigate directly to any of the individual lessons. You'll literally watch over the shoulder of your instructor as he shows you how to build state-of-the-art applications. Live lessons, the power of the world's leading technology experts at your fingertips. To learn more, visit mylivelessons.com today.